Hello everyone and welcome to our series on Egyptian hieroglyphs. Today we're doing lecture 5, which is on the wonderfully alliterative topics of prepositions, pronouns, and particles. Just to give a general overview, we're still doing Hoke chapters 1 through 4. I've split that content up into a couple of videos by topic rather than by chapter because I think that's just a more logical way of doing it. We are also taking independent pronouns from chapter 5. I personally believe that all the pronouns should be taught at once rather than having some in one space and some in another. And we are not including the verbs. There are verbs in chapters 1 through 4, but I'm saving that for a different video. I feel like verbs should be covered on their own, even at the most basic level. Prepositions, probably the easiest part of today's video. They function basically the same as those in English. Only real difference is you've got a different adjective ordering. So instead of having, a preposition followed by the adjectives that modify the object followed by the noun, the object of the preposition, in this case the adjectives follow the noun as a standard in Egyptian. But other than that, same basic function. They form a prepositional phrase that modifies a verb or a noun or even another adjective or adverb. We're going to go over a few of the basic prepositions, some of the most common ones. This is by no means a comprehensive list. One feature we're going to talk about much later in Egyptian is compound prepositions, which are made up of a couple of these basic prepositions, or sometimes a basic preposition and another word. But for now, we're just going to cover simple prepositions, non-compound ones. And the first three that we're going to cover, three of the most important, are monoconsonantal. That means one consonant does all the work. The first one of those is M. It's this little owl, just the letter M. It has the basic meaning of in. It can also mean by means of, like, with a tool, something like that. Or it can sometimes mean from, but 90% of the time it means in when it's being used as a preposition. Also, a meaning worth noting, if you have a predicate nominative, sometimes you have to put M in front of it. In general, this is used when your predicate nominative is something that is like an earned thing rather than an intrinsic quality. So if I were to say I am a man, that's something that's inherent to me, my maleness, that would not require an M. But if I wanted to say I am a teacher, that's something that's acquired. So you'd have to use an M in front of the predicate nominative there. But that's a relatively minor point, and it's something you'll see and just remember, but it's not that big of a deal. And I think we'll probably go over it again later as well. Then you've got N. N is just the letter N, little squiggle. The basic meanings are the dative, to or for. That is to say, if you do something for someone or give something to someone. This is not generally directional to. You don't go to the store with N. That's a different preposition. But you might go to see a person. You do use N for that. Now, there's another concept in Egyptian, which we'll go over, I think, in full a little bit later, give the full declension. It's the genitival adjective, and it's the way, other than the construct, that you can make a possession. And the masculine singular form of that is ni, ny. But, as is typical, the Egyptians don't bother to write the y. Most of the time it's just n. So it looks the same as this preposition, and it functions a way that seems very prepositional, like the preposition of. N does not mean of technically, but very, very often it appears as though it does, because a different word is being misspelled as N. So it is important to recognize and understand that N means of a good bit of the time. Our final monoconsonantal preposition is R. R does a lot of work. It has some other grammatical functions even beyond being a preposition, just being this little mouth. The basic meaning, most common one, is to or towards, directional thing. But it can also mean concerning. With a location, it can sometimes mean at, if you're separating from someone, you separate are that person, and with throwing something, you are into whatever you're throwing it. This is the preposition of those three. It's probably going to show up the most in the actual preposition form. The genitival N shows up a lot as well. And also, quick note on pronunciation, M and N are just pronounced as such, but R is a little awkward to say because it doesn't sound within the conventional Egyptological pronunciation, so it's perfectly acceptable to say air or re as a way of saying it, putting in that weak E where you're missing a letter, just to make it a little more consistent. I'll probably say R, but air is also fine. Then you have cher, dotted HR. It's a face. Cher is also the word face, and the preposition is the same thing. The preposition is often written with a stroke underneath it, which is not what you'd expect, worth keeping track of. Has the basic meanings of upon, and then also concerning or because, and occasionally it functions kind of like a coordinating conjunction, kind of like in addition to, but most commonly it's upon a location and concerning some event or purpose or whatever. And then chena, last one we're going to be going over today. Certainly not the last of the simple prepositions, but the last one we're covering, means with or together with. It's not represented by a single hieroglyph. That's why I had to take a screenshot rather than just using a letter. It's generally written like this. Not much to say about it. It just means with. And now we've covered basics of prepositions such that you understand them well enough. We can move on to pronouns. There are three basic categories of pronoun in Middle Egyptian, and they're classified by their relationship to other words. And this is not in the same way that English prepositions are classified, or pronouns. And English pronouns are classified by their role in the sentence, but in Egyptian they're classified by how much of a word they are, really, how tied they are to other words versus how much they stand on their own. And on one end of the spectrum, you have the suffix pronouns. The suffix pronouns aren't even words. They're, well, as the name suggests, they're suffixes. Enclitic is a term that some linguists use for this because this kind of thing shows up in other languages. And they are applied as a suffix to the ends of nouns, verbs. I think you can with adjectives, certainly prepositions. I think that is probably what I meant with writing this. But you may also do it with adjectives. I'm not sure. I think you would only really see that if it was an adjectival noun, though. So yeah, strike adjectives, it's just prepositions. The suffix pronouns act as a possessive with nouns. So you just staple one onto the end of your noun, use the first person singular with something, and it becomes my thing. They're also used as the object of prepositions. So the first person singular one, for example, is E, which is that, the letter I, E. And so if you wanted to say with me, you'd say chena-i. And then finally, they are the subject of the basic verb. We will have more on that in the next video. We're not, just know that for now. Talk about it later. So these are the suffix pronouns, with one exception, spelled exactly as the letters that they are. So first person singular common is E. Then you have ek and et or etch for second person, and F and S for third person. They do distinguish masculine and feminine for second and third person, in contrast to English, where only third person singular has different between the genders. And then N, 10, and sen in the plural. And you'll note, and you'll especially note, if you remember that I is a vowel and often omitted, that these are just an N appended to the feminine form. So I becomes in, et becomes eten, s becomes esen. Just easy way to remember. We don't know the vowels, of course, but that's certainly the general gist of it. Those plural ones are usually written with the plural strokes underneath them. Makes them easier to remember that it's a plural. Oh, sorry, my cat walked over the keyboard. A couple notes on the orthography. Yeah, I didn't put it in because they're just the alphabetic letters, with one exception. The letter I is a self-port, or is a read normally, but in the specific context of the suffix pronouns and also the dependent pronouns, it's written as a self-portrait, and that's that seated man picture ordinarily. A hieroglyph A1 comes up all the time. You'll see it later in one of the examples I give for a different phenomenon. But it changes. If a woman is speaking, it would be written with a female determinative. Sorry, cat again. If a God was speaking, it would be written with the God determinative, etc. It's just a picture of the person who's talking. It's very, I think, actually very convenient, but also one of my favorite features of the Egyptian language is that they change the first person pronoun spelling to reflect the speaker. The dependent pronouns are standalone words, but they're standalone words that only can exist in limited circumstances. They're always governed by something else. They have two roles. They're the direct objects of verbs. Again, more on that later. And they're the subjects of sentences that begin with the particle mech, which we'll get to later in this video. This is contrasted with suffix pronouns, which are the subjects of sentences beginning with the particle u. And that's about all there is to say on their roles, because they're kind of contingent on other information. So this is the way you write them. They're not that different from their counterparts in the suffix pronouns. You can see that they kind of mostly develop the same, other than the third masculine, and actually really the second masculine as well. They're pretty closely related. You know, you can see we, chu, chen, su, si. You can see the relation in the common and the feminine quite easily, and then they're in fact identical for the plurals, except that sometimes the third person is set instead of sen. But the plurals are the same even in the orthography. Again, same consideration of the suffixes. The I, but not the W, in the first person is a self-portrait. And unless you're doing set, like anything that ends in N, you get the plural bars. And now we come to the really interesting pronouns, the really weird ones. The independent pronouns, totally standalone words, never governed by anything else. They serve exactly one role. You have a sentence that is just X is Y, and you want your subject to be a pronoun. You use an independent pronoun, but not always, because the independent pronouns are very emphatic. They have a very strong sense. You wouldn't say, I am hungry, using the independent pronouns unless you were saying you were famished. Not you are making a proclamation, a strong statement. Most commonly, you're getting it with something like, I am the great God, or something like that. A statement made by a god or a pharaoh about their might. Really something powerful. Not that you would never use it, but not nearly as common. Think saying I myself in English, moi-même, I think in French, so I've been told, is very similar. Also, you can't use prepositions, and so this with Enoch. It has to just be an equation between a noun and an adjective, and then your independent pronoun. They all take N. They tend to be similar to the suffixes, actually, other than the first person, which is Enoch, which has kind of a weird writing. All the singulars are the word net with the suffix pronoun attached. Netek, netech, netef, netes. And the plural ones are something else. They're also not common. Especially the second plural, very rare. You would not see that often at all. These are the ones that are a little tougher. Enoch is written weirdly. It looks like that's nuke. That is Enoch. Little exception to the rule of thumb that bowl is NW. And then the Yenen is written reed leaf and the self-portrait, and then two N's in the plural strokes. And then Netchen and Netsen are written basically as you'd expect. We're going to talk about two particles today. Not the only ones, but they're by far the most important in Egyptian. You and Mek. They are required to initiate independent clauses in statements of fact. What do I mean by statement of fact? I mean that it is just a declarative sentence that the speaker wants to pass off as true. It's not like a lie detector thing, of course. You could lie, but you're just trying to make some statement that you want your audience to perceive as being true. They do work with verbs, but they also work they don't require verbs, which we'll get to in a second. The non-verbal sentence is how you express A is B kind of sentences, or at least it's one way of doing so, one common way of doing so. And it consists of the particle, which is either you or Mek, the subject, aka the topic, and the adverbial comment, which is whatever you're equating it to. That could be some preposition with some stuff following it. That could be a noun. That could be an adjective. And you don't need a form of to be. There is to be in the Egyptian language, but you don't use it in this like equal sign kind of sense. And one more thing, this is for independent clauses. As I saw in the previous slide, dependent clauses, things that would be like whenever or something like that, they don't get marked. There's no coordinating conjunction usually, or subordinating conjunction, but they don't begin with you, and that's your sign. We'll go over an example of that. And the other one we need to talk about is Mek, which does deserve a little special consideration because you doesn't really add anything to the sentence. Like, it serves a grammatical function, but it has no real meaning. And also, quick note on you before I forget is that the pronunciation was probably closer to eh. It would be very, very quick. It lost most of its consonantal force, so to just be a short vowel, instead of, we'll learn about this later, but the paradigm verb sejim, instead of you sejimeth, would probably be like a sejmeth, just a quick vowel, for those of you who are interested in having a proper reconstructed pronunciation. But I digress. Mek does add a little bit of meaning on top of its grammatical function. It is emphatic. You're drawing attention to something. It's like saying look or behold or lo. You wouldn't say that now, but in older English, you want to really point something out. It takes the dependent rather than the suffix pronouns as subjects. You takes the suffix pronouns as subjects, as I think was noted on the previous slide. Just it would be ue, uec, etc. But for Mek, you need the dependents because Mek can't take suffixes because Mek already has a suffix. If you look very carefully, you'll notice that that's a K at the end of Mek, which is also the second person singular pronoun. And of course, you'd be addressing a person if you said Mek. You'd say, look, such and such a thing. Maybe it's the reader, but you're addressing somebody. Mech and Mechen are the second feminine and second plural form. So if you're telling a woman to look, you'd say Mech instead of Mek, or Mechen for multiple people, changing exactly as the suffix pronouns do. That ayin that's not pronounced, that stays there, but the K changes based on the audience. So here's an example of a sentence. So you saw empire. The first sentence we're going to do, it shows up in the book. And it just means the man is in the house. And the way you break it down is you have your particle, which is you, which introduces our independent clause, our statement of fact. And then the next word is sa, which means man. And then you have a preposition, em, which has the basic meaning of in and pair, house. And we put those into our slots. We have our particle, and then our subject, and then our comment. So em pair altogether is the comment. and it becomes the man is in the house. And then here we have a slightly longer sentence. You saw père sat depet. Now this, at first glance, might look kind of weird. So our first sentence, that was a full, complete sentence, and now we have this other thing also, and it doesn't have another sentence marker. Sat depet is a complete thought. The woman is in the boat. But it's not a sentence because it doesn't have you, so it must be a dependent clause. And the relationship between the dependent and the independent is something for us to figure out. It could be after, it could be before, it could be during or while. So it could be, the man is in the house while the woman is in the boat. We don't really know. This is where context becomes very important. But we know grammatically, we can analyze it, and that's a dependent clause coming after. So after this, we will finally get to our verbs. We'll get more practice on sentence structure and that kind of thing. I recommend now you're probably good to start looking at some examples in Hoch. Some of them will have verbs. You won't be able to do them, but you can do all the nonverbal ones. You'll start being able to do the verbs after the next video. And again, if you're following along the whole biliteral thing, stick around and we'll be doing those next. First of all, we got final M. Im is either that little side symbol, not to be confused with the biliteral for guess, which is similar, and also that cross. Nem is what always looks to me like a butter knife. Chem comes up a lot. Chem in the word to sit, and in a few other words is that little tub. And then chem, meaning majesty or servant, is the baseball bat. The second one is more common and will show up in a lot of vocabulary items. Kem, which if you know anything about Egypt, you probably know that Kemet, the Black Land, is Egypt. Typo there, that's supposed to be gem, GM for that ibis. Gem as in the word gemi, to find. Chem is like a sled, almost like a toboggan looking thing. It may well be like a sled for pulling stones. Nen is two sedges. One sedge isn't N, though I don't know why they went with this, but they did. Chen is an unidentifiable plant. With the underline chen, tough to pronounce, is either what looks like a guy rowing, but just a little bit of it, or a headless calf. Both kind of abstract images, in my opinion, but that's underline HN. Sen is that arrow, shows up in the word for companion. Shen is a little knotted rope. If you twisted that rope around more, you get the dotted H, of course, but one twist and it's Shen. Then final R, ear, is the I. It also means to do, as well as just meaning I. Where, that bird means great. It's important to note the curved tail on the were bird, because there's a bird with a flat tail that looks very similar, which means neges, which is the opposite of where. Where means great or big, and neges means small or bad. Then you have per, which means house, which we already saw today, actually. Mer, either the hoe or the chisel, and that hoe is usually flat, but sometimes raised, which shows up in a lot of words, including the word for beloved. Cher, the face, also something we saw today. Cher, with the underline H, is that abstract drawing. Shows up in another preposition that hasn't been gone over yet, which means until. Or not, sorry, not until. That's jer. Cher means under. And then finally jer, which is until. Thank you for listening. And check our next video for some verbs.